Good day everyone! Today, we will learn together. Yes, we will learn together even when we're apart. We learn in Zoom, we learn in our room, we learn with a mask, we learn and stay on task. Yup, we will learn. No matter where, we will learn them everywhere. Good day everyone! I am Rafael M. Rodriguez Jr., a 12-year-old 9th grader, and I will be your teacher for today. Now, without further ado, let's start the ball rolling. Quadratic functions. What is a quadratic function? Ano nga ba ang quadratic function? ¿Qué es una función cuadrática? 什么是函数 Cosa funzione quadratica? In math, we define a quadratic equation as an equation of degree 2, meaning that the highest exponent of this function is 2. The standard form of a quadratic is y equals x squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c are numbers and a cannot be 0. And the highest exponent of the variable is 2. Hence, it is called a second degree function. Now, this is something to know about quadratic functions. The degree a variable can have in order to be a quadratic function is 2. The highest degree for a variable cannot be lower than 2 or cannot be higher than 2. It must be exactly 2. Dos, dalawa. Yes, only 2. So we need to make sure that we have this x squared in our function, and in addition to that, x squared must be the highest degree for a variable in that function. That's why it is called a second degree function. And now that we have seen the form for a quadratic function, let's look at some graphs. These are examples of graphs of quadratic functions. This one looks like an upward-facing U or an upward-facing parabola. A parabola is just a fancy name for a graph of a quadratic function. These upward-facing parabolas look like a smile to me. Here's another example of a graph of a quadratic function. It's kind of like a flip-over version of the first parabola. Instead of having an upward-facing parabola, what we have here is a downward-facing parabola. Looks like a frown, right? Both of these graphs are examples of quadratic functions. All quadratics will graph into some kind of similar curve. Some will be shifted higher, some will be shifted lower, some will be thinner, some wider, and some may be even sideways. But one thing is for sure, they will always graph into a curve. Now that we've seen the graphs, let's look at some examples of quadratic functions so as to understand it better. First, start with this. Y equals x squared. This is an example of a quadratic function. Now, you might notice that this example has no x term or constant. Well, that's okay. We are more concerned of the x squared value. Here we have x squared and the highest degree for our variable, which is 2, which means we have a quadratic function. Here is another example. Y equals 2x squared plus 4x minus 5. Here again, we have another quadratic function. We have an x squared term, and the highest for that variable x is a 2. Here we have a degree of 2, and here we have a degree of 1. The highest degree in this function is, you guessed it, a 2. The highest degree that x has in this function is a 2. And as I've said a while ago, it must be exactly 2 to be a quadratic function. And since it is, well, we have a quadratic function. Now, what about this one? Y equals x squared minus 9x. Here again, we have an x squared term. And the highest degree that our x has is 2. We have a degree of 2 here and a degree of 1 here. The highest degree is a 2. So, you guessed it, we have another quadratic function. Now, let's look at another example. Y equals negative 2x squared plus 3. We have the highest degree for an x here, which is 2. Now, notice that this x squared term is a negative. We have negative 2x squared. Well, that's okay. A negative in front of x squared term just means that the graph of these quadratic functions will look like this. A downward facing parabola or a frown looking parabola. Kasi pag nega ka, laging simangot ka talaga. These are examples of quadratic functions. I hope that we all learned something today. Remember that a little progress each day adds up to big results. As what Sir Aristotle once said, the roots of education are bitter, but the fruit is sweet. Every one of us is a work in progress. So let us train our potential until He cries for mercy. Lahat kayang pag-aralan, di ba? With that, thank you for watching. And may God bless us all with a good day. This has been Rafael Amadriguez Jr. signing off.